How about a nice round of applause for Mr. Sam Lansing?
All right, good to see you guys again. I've met quite a few of you already today, which is excellent. I hope that I share some valuable information with you guys today. Like you just mentioned, I'm Sam Lansing. One thing I want to mention before we get started is if you guys have any questions whatsoever, things that I haven't covered today or things you want to learn more about, you go ahead and email my personal Nagios work email address there, and I'll answer your questions as soon as possible. All right, it's working great. So a little bit about myself. Before we get started on the main presentation here, I'm a support tech at Nagios Enterprises. What that means is I handle forums, the tickets, remote sessions, phone calls, and everything in between. Known as the good cop on the forums, that's my little kind of avatar moniker thing. I do a little bit of development, a tiny little smidge of it, mostly PHP stuff on the front end of Nagios XI, some wizard work, etc. And I've been here for about 2.5 years or so now. So this presentation, I'm aiming to cover a lot of information in under an hour, which is probably going to be impossible for me to do. This is mainly going to be about how you can integrate data visualizations better in how you use our tools in your environments. Data visualizations, really anything from graphs themselves to maps of your environment, things such as the Hypermap in Nagios XI or the Heatmap, etc. So visualizations themselves, so what do they really bring to the table, right? So let's say you're currently monitoring everything in your environment. It's all good. You're getting alerted for everything just fine. What do data visualizations help you with? So essentially, I mean, picture it this way. So you're looking at Nagios XI. Here we've got all of our critical hosts right now. It's just a big table of information. We have all of our stats information here, which is all fine and dandy. That's very, very valuable information. But what we can do with data visualization, such as graphs, is transfer that all into a visual representation, which is a lot easier for the human brain to digest. So they offer you a pretty quick way to accurately tell when your hosted services may be switching or maybe about to switch states, or where you might need to change something, such as the amount of disk usage that one of your servers is accumulating. It can be a really easy way to spot trends between your hosts and services. I'm going to cover a few different things throughout the presentation here about sort of predictive data modeling, so to speak. One thing I do want to mention is I'm going to start kind of with Nagios XI and go through some of our other products. I am going to touch on Core at the end if we get to it. If I don't, which I may not based on how long my presentations usually go, feel free to come up here afterwards. I'll show you guys all the slides and I'll explain what I was going to go through in the presentation. One more thing I do want to mention here is just kind of a little fun fact. The main reason that visualizations are a little easier for you to read rather than just giant tables of information is they deal with the prefrontal cortex in your brain, which allows you to essentially recognize patterns easier in data sets. So I'll skip this one quick here, just some more background information. So now that I skip that, it's not really too much of an information overload anymore, so that little piece of information there doesn't really pertain. But there are typically multiple aesthetic properties that go into your data visualizations, things such as the color or the gradient of different sets of data as they compare to one another, the proportion or the different distances between the different data models, the shifting of the information as you move around through the data visualization. There's a couple I'm going to show here which I can't show in real time, unfortunately, but they do shift when you interact with it differently. So I've got a couple examples here, one of what could be termed as a pretty bad visualization and one that can be termed as a useful one. This one, I'd like to say ouch, because first of all, we've got a really pretty visualization here. You know, it's probably a nice little Photoshop visualization. We've got our main data sets here. What the problem is, though, is I've got to go over here to find all the information that I want, all the statistics, in this case percentages. And then I've got to try to trace over here and figure out where the heck in this giant circle of information this is actually represented. And once like I said, one of the main goals of data visualizations is to allow you to interpret the data easier. And in this case, yes, we can see, you know, for instance, this is, in this case here, it's about, you know, it's a fairly big share of the information we're looking at. But it's hard to tell how it compares to the other ones in this almost kind of like a pie chart look here. So the next one here, it's immediately, at least for myself and for the others that I talked to in our office, it's pretty easy to tell where the major sets of data are. Right here we've got oil, which is the largest set in this, this particular example. And we've got black coal and brown coal, and I'm sorry it's a little bit difficult to see the color differences there. But it's a lot easier. Your brain then, what it does is it's going to draw you towards this larger data set right away. So you're going to notice that right off the top, not only because of the font, but because of the size of our visualization here. So that brings you to the information you're looking for, and then from that you can draw down here and just look right below it, and you can see, in this case, the different dates from these sets of data that we've gathered here. Excuse me. So how do we handle data visualizations in XI? This also pertains to Nagios Core, for example. Essentially, what Nagios does is it runs a check plugin, right, against one of your hosts, and it returns what we call performance data. So with that check plugin here, we've got just our typical, this is our service status here that's going to be represented in the front end of Nagios itself. And then we've got this performance data chain right behind it here. And this is the information, for an example, with the XI graphs or with PNP graphs with Nagios Core that's used in the RRD files, and I'll get into this a little bit later, that create your graphs. So this might not mean a ton to you right now. As you can see here, we've got 33% here and here, so that does make sense. But this is the most important part here. This is what's responsible for creating that visualization. So Nagios itself, through a process perf data script in this example, actually strips this data out of that check, and then it uses a tool called RRD tool to dump that into an RRD file, which is a round-robin database file. And that's what's used for storing all the historical performance data and creating those graphs for you. And then, like I was getting into here, they're actively read in by your graphing tools such as PNP for Nagios, which was used with XI in the past, not with 2014 now, which I'll touch on in a bit. But it is still a tool you can use with Nagios Core to make use of that performance data that's returned. One thing I do want to kind of put an asterisk there is not every plugin you're going to find on the exchange is going to have the capability to send performance data up. I believe all the plugins in our Nagios plugins package do return performance data, but that is one thing you want to check on. It's typically not too hard to build it in, and if you guys have questions on how to add performance data processing into your plugins, you can ask me and I can kind of give you some examples for that as well. So how do we handle this in XI? So I'm going to talk about a few of these specific visualizations here. We're going to start with Hypermap and go down through Nagvis, the alert Heatmap, and the alert stream. First one I want to mention here is Hypermap. Now, as I was saying at the beginning, data visualization is not all about graphs. You know, it can be it can take multiple different forms of representing that data for you. In this case, as I was talking about in my last presentation, if you were here, we're displaying parent-child relationships. So it allows you to actually visualize the effects of network outages in your environment. Amongst other things, you can use those relationships for other methods as well. This graph, or this image itself, is actually interactive in Nagios XI. When you click on one of these icons, it's actually going to restructure it and allow you to view what's actually revolving around that specific host. And then you can drill down to the details pages for those specific hosts right through this button here. So parent-child relationships, essentially we're saying here we've got our Nagios XI server right in the middle. And Nagios XI has these different hosts here in this little chain. Now, the reason there's a chain here is because this host itself is what we call a parent of these individual hosts here. So essentially, long story short, if this host here goes down, and typically in your network, if that host goes down, you won't be able to talk to these ones, and they're going to go into a critical state. Through parent-child relationships, these will actually switch into an unreachable state because we really don't know if they're up or down. We just know that we can't talk to them. So just one example here, just a pretty basic visualization, but it does get the point across and allow you to kind of map out your network topology. So the alert stream, it's a pretty simple data visualization. Sorry, it's really all about the quick problem acquisition. It does use Java to generate it. That's why I said bleh on the last page. I'm not a big fan myself. I like to call this sort of the jelly visualization, if you will. It's a really free-form visualization, and much like that one we were looking at earlier with the coal and the oil usage, we've got just about the same thing here. So right away, we're taking a look at these large sort of blobs, if you will, of data, and this is actually showing us our alerts by volume in Nagios. So we can see which hosts are responsible for, the top 6 hosts are responsible for creating the most alerts in your environment. Another one that does kind of put across the same information is the heat map. I like to call this the predator visualization because it's essentially like almost a thermal image of your environment. So here, the main reason I like using this one is because the thicker, or the warmer the colors rather here, the more alerts are occurring in your environment by volume. So I can mouse over right here, and it's actually going to show me which host and which service on that host is really causing a lot of problems in my environment right now, where I might want to direct my NetOps team or my sysadmin team to take care of a problem. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Nagvis here. I've got a few slides on it because it's a really powerful tool. Nagvis is a third-party component that we've built into Nagios XI. You can also use it with Nagios Core. It works identically to Nagios, how we have it in Nagios XI. It essentially uses PNGs or JPEG images, anything in between, and allows you to plot your hosts on that image itself. So, of course, there's just an innumerable amount of options as far as that goes. I'm going to show a few of them here coming up. The first one I want to talk about is this one. As an example, this one could be used for an ISP or someone who provides software or hardware as a service to different houses or buildings. And you can see here what we've got is we've just got a basic visualization here of kind of a street map drawn. And we've actually plotted our individual hosts on here. And these ones, as we mouse over them, here we can see as an example, we've got our state type for the host and all that valuable information we get in the advanced page in Nagios. Another one similarly here, showing a country. Once again, you can use this, of course, for all your different systems or your data centers in that individual country or that region. And it's just kind of a topographical map. We do have an alternative to this in Nagios XI, which I'll show in a little bit here, which is a pretty neat alternative. But once again, pretty useful. I mean, it's essentially, like I said, it's any image you want to put on there. I think I've got one coming up here. Yes, perfect. So in this example, we've got an image of our data, well, not data center, server closet in this case, it looks like. But what we've done here is we've got all our individual blades or our servers here, and we've plotted our hosts in relevance to where they are in our environment here. So as a Nagios admin, if I'm also responsible for fixing the problems in my environment, I can run down the hall here and switch my KVM right over to the system that needs the work done, and I know exactly what's going on with it based on my Nagios checks and where it is in my environment. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the really performance data related visualizations here. The ones I just touched on are more about mapping your environment, and it's based on already configured stuff in Nagios or Nagios XI. The next ones here are going to deal with performance data specifically. So one here is capacity planning. This is a really big tool. It's awesome. It works wonderfully. What we use it for is predictive data modeling, if you will. So what we've got here in this specific image here, and this is under the report section in Nagios XI, is in blue we've got our observed data. This is the data that Nagios has already gathered from this specific service check. It's a 5-minute CPU usage check on this Windows server. And then in gray we've got our predicted data. Now what this does is actually going to look at all the peaks and the valleys and the averages that you've gathered from whatever time period you set it to. For instance, looks like we've got maybe a 2-3 month period here. And it's going to use those and predict into the future and tell you, relatively close to how the service may be in the future. So, for instance, using it for a CPU load, we can see that on average, using I think this is our linear fit algorithm there, it's going to show you it's actually going to drop off into the future. Now, of course, the larger the amount of data that you've got, the more valid these will be. But as I'll show you here on the next page, we've got a couple more examples. Once again, here's the one we were just looking at. This one's actually using I need to use my laser pointer here. This is using the Holt-Winters algorithm. Now there are 3 algorithms on there. It's linear fit, quadratic fit, and Holt-Winters. If you're using this in your environment right now or in the future, if you want to use it, make sure your team uses the same algorithm because they will show you different sets of data based on what algorithm you're using. So one of your users might say, hey, we're going to run out of disk usage in 5 days. And the other one might say, hey, no, we're going to be fine for the next 5 years. So make sure you're using the right one, or the same one, rather. This is another example, memory usage here. Once again, predicted and observed data. It looks like we're on a downward slope here. And I think on the next one here, we've got an example of perfect. So This is the actual table view. As you can see here, we've got that main graph that we were just looking at, and we've also got a little table. Now this table is going to show us one really important metric. This is our data integrity. So it's the not a number percentage. It sounds a little bit confusing. I hope I didn't bog you there a little bit. But essentially, nans are not a number. That's blanked out, zeroed out data. It's worthless. There's kind of, well, not necessarily worthless, but it's just a big patch of missing data in this case. So of course, the higher this number is, the greater the stronger and more correct your predictions will be. The lower it is, the more erratic or kind of off the wall your predictions may be as well. So this number typically does go up the longer that you've got your performance data gathered for. So for instance, if we set this to 3 months, it's typically going to be a higher number. The lower it is, the less data you're working with, so it'll be a little bit lower. So individual host and service performance graphs. This is another one. This is specifically to XI itself in this example. So your individual host and service performance graphs, and this is under the service detail or host detail page in Nagios XI. Once again, reason that RD data from the RD file. As I was mentioning there, that's it can be found on the details pages. Now it does offer a view of all the metrics returned by the check. So for instance, if we're looking at a standard Linux load check from our Nagios plugins plugin, it returns 3 metrics. Your 1, 5, 15-minute averages, just as you have with your top on your NIC system. So it's going to return all those individually. Now you could also have the option with that to export them as images, so JPEGs or PNGs of that individual graph itself. And it's also dashifiable. Now that's very important for XI, so you can add it to dashboards. So here is that load graph I was talking about. So it looks like we're looking at a fairly small period of time here, but we can see we've got some load spikes. That's a little bit typical of Nagios XI just based on the crons that we have running. Here's our individual metrics. Now what you can do with the Graph Explorer, and you can also install this on your core servers. There is a way to get this onto there as well. Is you can click on these individually. Unfortunately, it's not live, like I was saying, but it'll actually disable that performance data from showing up here. So you can only, for instance, you can disable 5 and only look at your 1 and 15-minute averages and compare them. And there's also, I believe I've got later on here is the multi-stacked performance graph where you can compare different hosts and services against one another. And, well, there it is. Didn't know it was right after it. So in an example here, it looks just about the same as that last graph. The difference with this is in the Graph Explorer under the home menu in Nagios XI, you can actually stack up as many different hosts and service checks as you want. Of course, typically if you're comparing the different performance data sets, you would likely want to have the similar data sets, for instance, different ports for your switches on their bandwidth usage, CPU usage on your Windows systems, etc. This one I kind of just cobbled together a big group here. But essentially, when you mouse over this in Nagios XI, it's going to pop up this little tab here, and this is going to allow you to compare your different data sets against one another. So you can, for instance, look at your bandwidth checks and see where you might need to institute bandwidth limiting on port 1 because port 1 is using a lot more than port 5. Your printer toner levels, which is really basic check, but also important if you get yelled at by people using your printers. And things such as that. Now, once again, I said this is dashifiable. That's, of course, the nice feature of Nagios XI is adding individual sort of iframes here, in this case, this entire graph to a dashlet. And I'm going to be showing a slide here a little bit later on of kind of a viz dashlet or dashboard that I put together. So tying this all together here with dashboards in Nagios XI essentially allows you to kind of build supplemental graphs for your system. So the one I'm going to show here is a dashboard that I created with our Linux servers host group. So these are all of my important Linux servers that I've gotten here that I'm monitoring, of course, including Nagios itself. And then I've also I went out and found individual graphs for those servers themselves for their specific service checks that are really important. In this case, our load on our Nagios XI server, our DNS IP match for this website that we're monitoring here, ping time to this site, as well as the CPU usage on this Windows server. I don't know why I've got a Windows server in there. It's not Linux. But just an example there, kind of building your own data visualization with dashboards in Nagios XI. Now, this is extremely basic. There's not a lot of information on here. Because I did want to share one thing with you guys. This is something I'm building in Nagios XI right now, is essentially a centralized Datavis component. Now, if you're familiar with components in Nagios XI, you can build them in to essentially expand on the already vanilla capabilities of Nagios XI itself. Essentially, what this will allow you to do is use your already existing RD files, so you don't have to regenerate anything with Nagios XI. And it's going to give you a number of different libraries that you can use and select your own custom graphs from there. So for instance, maybe you like just straight performance graphs, with peaks and valleys all over the place, or maybe you like pie graphs or more than that. And you can go in and you'll be able to select different graphs for each individual host or service and add them to dashboards. I'm also looking at building in things such as D3 streaming. D3 is a really powerful graphing library that we use in NCPA, if you've seen the live performance graphs in NCPA. So I'm going to hop into Network Analyzer really quick here. Just once again, like I was saying, this is kind of just an overview of different visualization types. In this example, we've got two different graph types in Network Analyzer itself. We've got a linear graph, which is more of our standard kind of graph type. We've got our general peaks and valleys here, much like our Graph Explorer graphs I was just showing. We've also got a logarithmic graph. And this is really for larger data sets. It kind of averages it out a little bit and smooths it out. But as you can see here, if we look at the same point in time, we are looking at the same data set as well. We also have these top talker sort of, they're kind of like pie graphs themselves in Network Analyzer. The reason I wanted to show this is, once again, it's going to draw your attention to, and these sources in Network Analyzer themselves are sharing about the same amount of data, but it'll pull your eyes to which source address that we're monitoring with Network Analyzer is actually causing the most network traffic in our environment. And this one here is showing just about the same amount of data, but it's sort of an inverted visualization of that. So you can kind of, this uses a different algorithm for it, but you can kind of see like the difference between these individual graphs, these circular graphs themselves. So this is one example I wanted to show of tables and just the data sets of tables and how they're translated into those graphs. So the graphs we just looked at are actually pulling data from these tables here. And of course, it is nice to see all this granular information in your environment, no matter what you're checking. It may not be Network Analyzer specifically. But this way we can actually see those individual metrics, and then we can go back to those graphs and we can see how they look visually. And I wanted to show this just because you can see the strengths of visualizations and not having to dig through this big pile of information here, unless of course you're troubleshooting, and it's also very valuable for that. All right, so I am going to get to core here, so I'm going a little bit faster than I did last time. So I've got a few different options here for Nagios Core that I wanted to share. The first one is Nagios Graph. I did want to point that out because if you're currently looking for options for Nagios Core, I would kind of steer away from that one. It hasn't been actually supported by that group for quite a while now. I think it's about 3 years out of date itself. The ones that I want to mention more prominently here are PNP for Nagios, which once again uses those RD files like I was showing you, which is also present in Nagios XI itself. Then Nagvis, like I was just showing, as well as Cacti. And then, of course, like I was saying, you also have the option of high charts in Nagios Core. So you can get those cool graphs that you can actually interact with, and you can click and drag on them and actually zoom down and view all the peaks and valleys. So PNP for Nagios, once again, like I was saying, uses the standard RD files. The performance data is stripped the exact same way through a script. It does have a web front end that you can hook into and export the information you've got on these graphs. As an example here, we're once again looking at our CPU utilization for localhost. The main difference I want to point out with this and high charts, for example, is this is fairly non-interactive, PNP is. Whereas opposed to with high charts, you can actually click and drag and zoom into different time periods and manipulate that data as far as what you're looking at as you move your mouse over it. And as you can see here, there's a number of different data sets that we're actually showing here, and some of them we can't even see because of this graph here. However, you do have the option with PNP as well to export this data as a PDF. Essentially, it takes a snapshot of that graph itself and exports it as a PDF file, much the same as we do with our graphs in Nagios XI. And then you also have the option here of selecting specific time ranges to go through, much like I was showing with our capacity planning report. So Cacti is another really powerful tool. Essentially what it does is it dumps the data. It uses RD tool as roughly the same way as PNP does, but it sort of dumps the data into a MySQL database itself, and it actually maintains those individual data sets every 5 minutes. So it does deal with averaging data just like the ones we were just looking at, but it gives you the ability to create organizations for your graphs in your environment, and it's a very powerful tool for network monitoring and looking at the actual returns from your SNMP checks through MRTG on graphs themselves. So if you're not familiar with MRTG, just a brief example here. We use MRTG and Nagios XI for the network switch and router monitoring wizard. So it hooks into your switches and your routers, your firewalls, et cetera, and returns that SNMP data to you for bandwidth usage, et cetera. And that's the same thing that Cacti uses right here. So taking a look here, here's an example of the web front end. This is a little bit of an outdated image. Cacti does look a little bit different now. But one example here, we're looking at individual returns from some bandwidth checks here. We've got our standard MRTG inbound and outbound data. And we're looking at it here. It's a little bit clearer than PNP. For one reason I want to point out specifically here, we've got our main inbound traffic in green. But the difference here is the outbound traffic is just highlighted. It's just one simple line here, so you can actually compare one to the other a little bit easier. Actually, if I hop back here, as I was mentioning trees as an example, we're looking at the tree mode right now in Cacti. We do have the backbone tree here. That's a specific one that's been named, and we've got our individual hosts under there, so you can manage your different sites and compare bandwidth usage from one to the other, etc. This is just a brief look at sort of the management system of Cacti itself. It allows you to do things such as select default time spans to look at. So for instance, if you want your users in Cacti to only be able to look at the last day's worth of data or the last week's, if that's most important to you, you can set all that up in here. There is baked-in user management with Cacti itself. All right, so I just want to talk briefly about looking forward here. So essentially what we're looking at trying to do with Nagios XI, and this is something I'm trying to push myself into the forefront of, unfortunately. The last 3 months of conference work leading up to this has been a little bit tough. But I want to build in the ability to build a report that's based on your visualizations and statistics that are paired together. So right now, you've got your graphs in Nagios XI or Core, and then you've got your typical statistics, in sort of a table, if you will, your host and service details pages. And I like to, and this is something I've actually built in already with my component, is allow you to compare one another to each other on the same page. So you don't have to necessarily try to look at that big table of data and draw the graphs in your head, which is really difficult to do. I've tried to do that, and it takes a little bit of work. As well as building in almost near real-time D3-like graphics. So something that I think is really important is to try to get you the most up-to-date information from your graphs. One of the big downfalls with graphing with our solutions and many management solutions or network monitoring solutions is they're typically not real-time. It's data that's already been gathered from the past. So if you're using it to try to predict when a host is going to go down or a service, most times it's just too late. One solution to that is D3, like I was mentioning. It's going to show you near real-time statistics as they're checked on your systems. And then kind of enhancing on visualizations in NSTI. That's one thing I did not show, and NCPA. And that NCPA itself does have those D3 graphs, but it would be nice to kind of build in some additional features into that, or at least give you the option to. Of course, you don't want to build the agent itself to be too large. And I can't believe I got through all of that already. Wow. Does anybody have any questions? I think he's got a microphone right there.
Just in regards to larger installations for heat maps as well as for the other maps, what else? What can you do? Just because it's so
so cluttered.
So cluttered.
That's typical with things like Heatmap and the alert stream, because those are pretty static. Because they deal with metrics that are already populated in Nagios. In that case, it's the alerts that have already occurred. So it's difficult to kind of clean those ones up.
Is there any way of taking a particular host group, especially if you have it so broken out, and still get like the heat map or the other graph?
Currently, you cannot filter it down. Well, you can if you work with the PHP on the back end, which is the solution for a lot of things. You cannot currently do that. Like I kind of skipped through that slide really fast. I am doing a little bit of work on that, and I really want to add in the ability to filter down to specific hosts, services, et cetera, and see their alerts over time in the heat map or the alert stream, et cetera. So you can actually filter it down to them like that.
So like hosts or host groups even?
Host groups would be a little bit trickier to get that data on, simply because it's going to be the individual objects in that group that are alerting in that case. I believe it would be possible. That would take a lot more work than what I've been typically looking at currently, but that's a good idea. I can definitely take a look at that and see how we can build that in.
So.
One thing that wasn't clear, at least to me, was the capacity planning. Is that part of Nagvis or part of XI?
That's part of XI itself. There is, and it's something I didn't mention on here, I don't know why, there's an alternative to that you can use with Nagios Core. For instance, if you're not using Nagios XI, I'm going to have to look that up and try to find it. So if you guys have questions on that or want to poke me and remind me about it throughout the conference, I could definitely try to figure that out. That is a feature of XI itself, though, and it's not built into Nagvis.
I actually just wanted to touch on what you said a little bit ago. It's the Hypermap is the one that I have the most issues with. I mean, just being able to do basic filtering on a host group. So 90% of my hosts are in one host group, but that's not really what I want to care about at this point. I just want to look at the internal infrastructure rather than all these external things. And also being able to make that map a different size rather than just that static, that's what you get right there.
Right. Actually, let me hop back to that quick. I think I might have a solution for the size issue itself. Oh, shoot, it won't show it on here. I believe that the Hypermap itself is actually dashifiable. Now, when you add that to a dashboard, then you'll be able to drag that iframe and make it larger, and it should automatically refresh for you. I think I cut it off in the screenshot here. There should be a blue icon on the top, and I can check that afterwards if you want to come up here on one of my systems and take a look at that for you. Third? Fourth. Okay. And fifth? All right. And specifically with Heatmap and alert stream, or in general?
With anything that applies to, I have a medium installation, 15,000 services.
Right.
And network engineers click on maps, they have no idea what they do, then I have to restart Nagios HTTP, and it's just a mess.
That is one of the current issues, is the scaling of the performance graphs and the visualizations with environments. Unfortunately, that wasn't probably not taken into account when it was built in the first place, because I don't think anybody thought XI would, or Core, as an example, would get to be as big as it is now. So we're kind of backtracking right now and working on this stuff and building in solutions for that. So I will definitely, that is important, though, being able to filter down to specific groups, because in large environments, it's almost a necessity to have stuff in host groups, service groups, et cetera.
I actually have a question regarding the Hypermap. Because some of them, for example, I've got an instance, and it's watching something like 250 hosts. Is there any way you can actually zoom in on that?
Yes. So,
because
I will
trying to look at 250 hosts is insanely tough.
I will try to RDP really quick here, and hopefully be able to show you something, maybe, if the network doesn't drop. You can actually click on, you can't zoom, well, you can zoom in. You can actually click on those individual, those little dots as well, and it will restructure the map. I've actually got it up right now. Perfect. Okay, so as an example, if I were to click on this one here, and at this resolution, it's a little bit tough to show. So the map will restructure here if it renders. Unfortunately, on this specific demo system, I pulled this up to answer a question earlier. I don't have a lot of parent-child relationships set up. But let's click on that one there, and it should actually restructure and kind of center your view on that specific object itself. And then you can, within that, it's a little bit difficult to do. I don't know if I can even do it with my touchpad here. You can scroll in and scroll out on the Hypermap itself, and zoom in and out on that visualization as well.
Yeah, that's my issue. I've got 400 and 500 hosts on there, so I can't click on those little dots because they're just one big round line all the way around. That's my issue, that I need to be able to either enter a host so I can see those the relationships, or zoom it further out.
What would you say to maybe the ability to type in a host name or select a host or service or host group from a drop-down, and then filter into that and only show ones that are related to that specific object?
We also have the issue where I have, even with the host group, so we have our Wintel admins, but the trouble is, if there's only 100 hosts, it still scrunches up their 100 into one little area rather than trying to spread out, because it's trying to draw all 400 hosts and then just doesn't draw those 300.
Yeah, trying to fit it into there. Yeah, I do agree. Filtering that down, that is one other thing I was taking a look at. I unfortunately didn't dive too much into it this last year before the conference, but there are a lot of, some of these basic visualizations like this one that are already in XI. There's a lot we can do to kind of shape those up and allow you to filter down specifically. And we're kind of going into a development cycle, I think, right now in XI, since we just released 2014, so we're going back and working on features, bug fixes, et cetera. So it's a great time to put those in. I'm actually going to put in a lot of these feature requests just to have them on the books for you guys internally and mark those down.
Okay. I got two things. One thing on the Hypermap, another feature request. I like being able to filter for just all my routers or infrastructure, but it always starts on local host as well. And my MPLS network is way off the screen. So the first thing I do is click and then click again to get to where I need to see.
Right.
And it would be really great if it came up in the dashboard where I wanted to monitor.
So kind of set like an anchor point on it?
Being able to start someplace other than Nagios
Just
process.
the center, right.
Which is always in the center. But my real question had to do with the high charts.
Mm-hmm.
And is there a way to template these and to build calculations into your charts? Or is it just straight up?
I don't know about calculations into it. There are high charts templates that pertain to the specific type of visualization it's showing you. So that's just the one I was showing there under the Graph Explorer is just one sort of template for that. High charts itself has a pretty extensive graphing library. And then you can actually, the way we've built it into XI is it's pretty difficult to dig down through it, but you can template that out. As far as calculations specifically, do you still have the microphone or?
No,
okay.
I'm sorry.
Oh,
it's all right. But I don't know, maybe you have data that has to be compared against two different data sets. And you want to visualize, I don't know, a ratio or some kind of interdependence between multiple data sets.
Okay. Yeah, as opposed something similar to the multi-stack graphs that I was showing, where you're comparing.
Those are very cool, but no.
Okay.
I can't think of a good example in the can.
Did you want to grab me right after this and?
We can talk about it.
Yeah, brainstorm a little bit. All
Hi. Do I need this or can I? Yeah, because we're recording. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Test. All right. Sam, I probably would have taken this offline with you, but since this is data visualization, I figured there might be other interest. Stephen Few's books, FEW, Business Information Dashboards, goes quite a bit into visualization. Edward Tufte, Tufte, also does quite a bit with visualization. About 10% of men are colorblind, so things like heat maps look black, right? Or putting black text on a red box. Lastly, be careful with the statistics. This is non-normal data. It is truncated at 0, so it's not Gaussian. So you have to be very careful about doing statistic. There's no transformation for it either. Logarithmic, Poisson, no transformations. So take that with as you get into the statistical piece and the predictive piece.
Yep. Well, there's a lot more that goes into the science of that than I personally know, unfortunately. But thank you very much for sharing that.
Just for the hypermap, I would say it would be nice if we could just designate certain nodes as just don't bother displaying these. I would certainly like to have certain clusters of mine that I don't care if they're on the hypermap. I
To
just
exclude them?
exclude certain nodes.
Okay.
Yeah, that as a feature request. That would
That'd be
nice.
another, I mean, that'd be something you could build in as well with what I was talking about in the future here. Being able to filter down to specific hosts that you're showing and their children.
Any other?
For those of us who are already using Nagvis and are looking at going to XI like I am, what version of Nagvis are you using? And can we upgrade Nagvis individually, or do we have to keep it bundled with XI?
I don't know off the top of my head what specific version we're using. Are you using the most recent one? on your
I'm actually using 185 beta in production because I was waiting for like the zoom function to come out because I really need it. And so as soon as it was stable, we grabbed it.
Yeah, I'm not sure what specific version we're using. I know we have been looking at upgrading, but we were having some troubles upgrading the Nagvis version on the back end of XI. That one I can definitely, I'll be able to answer for you a little later on. I can grab that information for you.
Thanks.
As well as let you know kind of an upgrade path, or at least set it up alongside your current one and see how they compare to one another.
Sorry, I did do a little bit where I upgraded Nagvis on top of the Nagios side, but I really have problems with the integration with user accounts, and because within Nagvis you have these user accounts, and it all got really, really messy. So that would be really nice if that was integrated a lot better with Nagios. So when the user logs in, that their credentials are then sent across the Nagvis. And
so kind of pairing between XI users and Nagvis users, and giving them their already pre-configured
And
set
what
of maps.
what I then ended up doing is having a Nagvis page, but then because you haven't logged into Nagios, it doesn't show your credentials or what you can see. So
Right.
if we can integrate that a lot better, or pass user credentials to the Nagvis page, that would make life a lot easier too.
Okay, that's a great idea. Thank you.
And just a reiteration on all of these suggested benefits, make sure that you're getting the information by way of email to Sam so that he can get that into the hands of the right people who can do things with that.
Yes, please. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Please email me. I guess I'm not going to forget. I'm going to forget probably 90% of what I talk to people about, unfortunately, at the conference because of the busyness of it all. So once again, slansing@nagios.com. Feel free to email me there. You can meet me up later, and I can give you a business card as well with my contact information. So.
Any last questions? Well, fantastic. How about a nice round of applause then for Sam Lansing?